Some say newspapers are dying. Some say the news media can't keep up with the changing pace of information and technology. The news is changing. What do these changes mean to the public and the free flow of facts and well-informed opinions? A panel of local editors and reporters are ready to talk about the state of the news media here on Special Edition. News comes racing at us in a constant stream that can swell to a gushing flow of facts, would-be facts, and widely varying opinions. Even as we confront a sometimes overwhelming array of information delivered instantaneously from dozens of news sources, news organizations across the country face cutbacks in staffing and resources, and paradoxically, increased demand to do more and more with less and less. To discuss the state of the news media, particularly here on the Peninsula and in the Bay Area, we are fortunate to have a panel of reporters and editors who serve as our local sources for news and information. Welcome to Special Edition. John Mays has been editor-in-chief of the San Mateo Daily Journal since 2000, the only locally owned daily newspaper in San Mateo County. The Daily Journal is a free newspaper with a circulation of about 25,000 and a website that averages about 6,000 to 10,000 hits a day. The Daily Journal covers the communities from South San Francisco to Menlo Park, and John has been covering the Peninsula news for local newspapers since 1987. Thanks for joining us, John.
Sure.
Mario Dianda has been editor of the Palo Alto Daily News since 2007. The Daily News is part of the Bay Area News Group, a division of media news that includes more than a dozen newspapers from Marin County to the East Bay to San Jose, including the San Jose Mercury News. The Daily News is headquartered in Menlo Park, has a daily circulation of about 16,000 and covers the communities from San Carlos to Los Altos Mountain View. It typically shares content with its sister's newspapers. Mario has been reporting and editing on the Peninsula and throughout the Bay Area since the 1980s, and much longer than we'd like to recall, I suspect. Mario, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Stacie Chan. Stacie is associate editor of Patch.com, an AOL-owned company that provides highly localized news content entirely online through a series of locally reported and edited blogs and web pages under the rubric of Patch.com. More than any other news organization on today's panel, Patch encourages readers to send information, photos, announcements, news releases to Patch, and to use Patch as their own community forum, operating almost as a community bulletin board. Stacie, a graduate of Stanford in communications, worked at Southern California newspapers and electronic media before joining Patch in 2010. Thanks for joining us, Stacie.
It's great to be here.
Kiet is a general assignment reporter for Bay Area TV station CBS 5, part of a national news media conglomerate that includes 29 TV stations and 129 radio stations in 30 media markets. CBS 5, widely known as KPIX TV, is one of the region's TV news mainstays and is frequently at or near the top in TV news show ratings. KPIX broadcasts 30 hours of locally produced newscasts each week, including 5 hours every weekday. Kiet covers the South Bay for CBS 5, a San Jose native and alumnus of San Jose State University. Kiet has worked in Atlanta, Albuquerque, San Jose, and Salinas, and he has been with CBS 5 since 2008. Thanks for joining us, Kiet.
Thank you.
Anna Duckworth is a reporter for KCBS Radio, which is also part of the CBS network of radio and TV stations throughout the country. KCBS is another Bay Area news mainstay and is frequently among the top-rated radio stations in the region, both among all radio stations and among news stations. It remains the only all-news radio station in the Bay Area. Anna has been with KCBS since 2010, but she has a long career in Bay Area news, including stints as a reporter for KPIX TV and KRON TV. She is a journalism graduate also from San Jose State University. Thank you all for being here. Whew. You all have too many credentials. Let's start with you, Stacie, and we'll work around the group a little bit. What is the state of the news media? We read all the time about newspapers, about news organizations cutting back. Just this week, I think it was the Portland Oregonian announced it was going to producing online twice a week and not publishing a print edition twice a week. A lot of people who are consumers of news are worried about what's going on. Tell us what you think is the state of news media and how Patch fits into this.
Sure. As you've been saying in your introduction, the state of the news media is in flux. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think this is the most exciting time we've seen since the advent of the printing press. And more than ever, you have multiple sources where you can get your information. When you're at work, you don't have to be lugging around your newspaper. You can be checking online, or you don't have to be at your computer anymore. You can be checking on your mobile app. There's so many mediums through which we can get our information now. That's exciting to me because we as journalists now have to cater to our audience and try to engage them with our information. It's no longer us telling them what to think about. It's how are our readers consuming the news, and how are we going to best present this to them?
Mario, you've been in the newspaper business a long time, and you've been through some of these changes. What's it like? What is the state of the news media? And was I overly pessimistic about talking the way I talked about newspapers at the top of the show?
Well, let's say I've been in the news business a long time, as you pointed out, and maybe 20, 25 years ago, I started hearing about the demise of the newspaper industry and how the internet was going to wipe us out in 3 to 5 years, and I've been hearing that every 5 years. That's not to say it hasn't affected the news industry. The Daily News, as well as a lot of other newspapers throughout the country, have been reduced in size and in publication dates.
The Daily News is one of those papers that stopped publishing a print edition twice a week, right?
Correct. We are 5 days a week. 3 days are still printed. We have an e-edition all 5 days and a subscription to the e-edition. Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days when we don't print. The reasons for that are combined. It is a cost-saving measure, and in the newspaper industry, paper and print still cost a lot of money. It's also a way to approach readers who these days more and more have tablets and other devices from which they do consume their news. Printed products are costly. A lot of readers still like them, but interestingly, the thought was that a lot of the older readers would go away once we started doing this, and we actually have a lot of folks in their 70s, 80s, even older than I, who are actually calling in, asking how to get our paper on the tablet with the apps. So we are trying to adjust.
Older than you, wow. John, the Daily Journal is a local published newspaper. You also have a print edition, and you get basically the same content in both places. What's the state of the news media from your perspective?
I mean, I think it's going well. I mean, we started in 2000, and if it weren't for the advances of technology, with desktop publishing, the uses of the internet, I don't think a paper such as ours would have been able to do what it started doing and it is doing through today. Primarily because of being able to use the internet as a resource for information. We can get it quickly. Desktop publishing, we can transmit our pages to the press, online. Because of those technological advances, we were able to sort of have this niche newspaper that focused on local with a small news group. A small newsroom that was able to sort of focus on San Mateo County solely. Rather than being part of a larger operation. So I think for us, the internet and technology has been a benefit. Moving to the internet, we started out with a website, and we've made changes to the website as we can. And I think I kind of echo what Stacie said. It's exciting. What newsman wouldn't want to have news at their fingertips 24/7? So it's just the ability to be able to sort of process that in different ways that makes it interesting for us.
Anna, you're working at KCBS, you worked in TV. One of the things that really characterizes the electronic media is just the constant sort of change in ownership, the conglomeration of ownership. You work for a local radio station that's been in the Bay Area and really been a tradition in the Bay Area for a long time, but is owned by a massive organization. How is that affecting the news business you're in? What is the state of the business you're in?
Well, I think radio is in a unique situation in terms of media, especially KCBS, because like you said, it's the all-news radio station for the Bay Area. It's been around for over 100 years now, and the format really has not changed very much in the past several decades. People know what they want from us. We know what they need, what they want. We have the traffic and weather every 10 minutes.
Yes, we've
and that's
noticed
why
that.
people listen. We have captive audiences in their cars, and our listenership has actually gone up. I don't work on the business side, but from what I've heard, advertising dollars are going very well for KCBS radio. And I really do trace it back to it's the standard that the listeners are looking for. And KCBS has established that over the decades in the Bay Area, as have all the publications that are represented here and Channel 5. It's the standard that I believe the viewers and listeners and readers are looking for. They want to go to the source they can trust. They want to go to the one that's giving them the impartial coverage. And I have to trace that to why our numbers are going up at a time that we're still coming out of a really economic hardship.
Because the information is reliable, you mean?
Because the information's reliable, because we've built that rapport with our audience. They trust what we're saying, and we take that seriously and work, to get it right.
Kiet, if you look at your resume, I described all the places it's sort of a classic TV reporter route. Went to a journalism school, got a degree and focused on electronic communications, and then you moved around. Lucky for you, you get to come back to the place you grew up, which is the Bay Area, which is a top market, but you worked your way up the ranks. So it's interesting in the context of a changing medium that a very traditional route is the one you took. So against that backdrop, what's your take on the state of the media?
I think the state of TV news is hopeful. I think that in the depths of the recession, it was looking pretty dark. There were some major cutbacks, loss of revenue, but now in the most recent sweeps period that we just finished back in May, most of our newscasts saw gains, and that's pretty unusual when you compare it to all the other stations in the Bay Area. And so what I think this tells us is that I think we're getting smarter about getting our content to viewers where they're watching it, and I'm seeing a lot more sophistication in the way that we present our stories on mobile devices. And so this is a good thing because now you can monetize this, whereas before the content was just free-flowing and it was harder to capture some of that revenue. So I think now we're making better use of the technology, and I think that people have been predicting the demise of local TV news for years, just like they have with newspapers, and I just think it's unfounded.
Well, let me ask a general question. Somebody jump in when they feel compelled to answer. I started off by saying that some say the newspapers are dying. Are they? And I want to ask it in this context, which is both radio and TV have historically depended on the newspapers to provide another flow of information. I don't want to put this in a critical context because I don't mean it that way, but you'll write a story for a local newspaper and then you'll see the radio and TV follow it. Patch relies heavily. Everybody seems to rely heavily on newspapers as sort of a foundational source of information. And against that context, we see that the papers are dramatically smaller than they used to be. Mario and I used to know a newspaper called the Redwood City Tribune, which was as small on Mondays as the Chronicle is today. It is really a small newspaper, not just in terms of its bulk weight, but the size of the pages. The number of people working there is dramatically lower. Our newspapers, I know the predictions have been over and over again, but do we see them coming to an end? Who wants to start on that question?
Well, I think it's like every other industry, it's transforming. And yes, it's true that newspapers are a lot smaller and the publications themselves are a lot lighter. What we have to do really with smaller staffs is use not only other reporters, but just use the community more, try to invite the input from the community. Through Twitter and other sources, we get a lot of information. Naturally, you have to, go through there and confirm everything. But there are a lot of news sources out there that weren't available just 10 years ago, which really enhance some of the reporting. In our situation, since we do have numerous newspapers that are connected with us, it enables us to sort of broaden our coverage. We do have the San Jose Mercury News, from which we get a lot of our business news, which applies in Palo Alto, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, as well as San Jose and other areas. So there's a lot of interdependence within the news media itself.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, also, if the Chronicle was still mighty, or is this at the size that it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, then you probably wouldn't have room for publications such as ours, because they sort of scaled back. It enabled
they stopped covering the local communities.
Right. So I mean, it enabled maybe more nimble organizations to kind of step in and fill that gap, and so you get a more diverse point of view. And there's different publications that kind of suit your point of view or what your interests are. If you're interested more in Palo Alto area, you can pick up Mario's paper. If you're more interested in the core area of San Mateo County. You can pick up my paper. There's other papers around as well. So I think it's not necessarily that the news industry or newspapers are dying. I just think that like Mario was saying, is that it's definitely just shifting. So maybe some of the larger metros, not the national publications, they're going through their own thing, but some of the larger metros are sort of scaling back and shifting and kind of determining what to do. And then there's other, like I said, more nimble organizations that are filling the niches that they've sort of vacated.
Yeah. And just to echo a little bit on what John says too, is I think the Bay Area is probably an anomaly, especially the Peninsula, where you do have a lot of little newspapers that are going at it. From a publisher's perspective, that's probably not a good thing, because a publisher would like to rake in as much money as possible. But as a consumer, I think if you're living on the Peninsula, you should really be happy, because not only do you have the Daily Journal, the Daily News, but there's other weeklies and daily newspapers as well as Patch. And a lot of our newspapers, although we cover some of the same issues and events, we do have different personalities, and people come to know what to expect from certain brands.
I think you put it about as diplomatically as you could when you said that newspapers provide the foundation for a lot of what drives the news in your community. I think the honest way to put it is that a lot of other outlets basically borrow or steal from the newspapers, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think a lot of the other outlets try to build upon what the newspapers have already done. But because newspapers have such durability when they're printed and they're there and they're in your face, I think that keeps it in the minds of people who have news tips. And so if anybody out there has any question as to the importance of newspapers in your community, I think this is it, because they are the ones that really kind of set the agenda, and they drive a lot of the news, at least at the beginning of the day, on what you see and what you hear about your community.
Is that right, Anna?
I'm going to echo that, because that drives a lot of the broadcast news. Since we cover the entire Bay Area, our stations do. I mean, when I come into work every morning, all the major papers and a lot of the dailies are laid out on the assignment editor's desk. We're on the computer checking all the local papers, and we go through and see which stories we want to build on, and see which ones are piquing our interest and people in the newsroom, and we make a lot of decisions based on it, and we're shifting along with the dailies. As they change, we're just moving right along with them, and we still rely on them heavily to get the stories that we decide we want to
Right,
cover.
but just if I could, I mean, there is also a symbiotic relationship here. So it's not as if they're just simply, the TV and the radio are just simply taking the information from the newspapers. Throughout the day, news editors at newspapers are also tracking what these guys are doing to see what's developing throughout the day, getting local reactions, see what sort of, what's hot and what's not, so that we know what tone to set for the next day's edition.
When you'll hear something on KCBS and decided to deploy some staff in a direction because of what you've heard.
Well, sure. I mean, for the most part, KCBS and CBS News TV also, covers the region, right? We cover San Mateo County, so there's not often that there's something major happening in San Mateo County that we hear about from them. But from a regional standpoint, when we're looking at what is important to everyone, for instance, the impending BART strike, or what could happen with that. We're starting to see, we hear from them reactions from writers, reactions from the unions, reactions from the transit agency itself, and then we start thinking.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
We have to take a break. We'll be right back. Hold that thought.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Special Edition. We're talking about the state of the news media on the Peninsula and the Bay Area, and it's a remarkable array of optimists here about how things are going. We were talking off the air about, and Kiet, you sort of kicked this off a little bit, the interactivity. John, you were talking about the interconnectivity between all of you, that you really rely on each other. And it's interesting, because I would say a generation ago there was much more competition and much more of a pride in not using what someone else did. So how has that changed, and how has that changed because of things like social media, Twitter, things like Patch that provide some of the services that something like Bay City used to provide, which is a bulletin board of here are things going on that you can pay attention to?
Well, I'll absolutely say that Patch does not view any of you guys as competitors. In fact, it's so different in that I think reporters used to race to the scene to get the scoop and beat everyone else. And obviously our platform is a little different, where we want to be partnering with as many different news media as possible. We have, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it quite yet because it's not officially signed, but we have several partnerships with Bay Area media, including Peninsula Television, where we send them the original videos that we're producing so they can compile it into a segment. And in turn, we publish a lot of the videos, and probably this special edition, on our site as well. And so you asked, are newspapers dying? I absolutely hope not, because it's just another source that we're all monitoring. We're all looking at what everyone else is doing. And when we do this, it's not stealing or copyright infringement. We're just getting ideas from each other, and we try to build on that. We try to build on that to give our readers what they want and provide additional value to something someone else has already done.
And to keep with the optimistic tone, because that's
It's
where
killing me, you know.
Well, that's where the social media is so valuable for us, you know, because now I can get up in the morning and I literally just check my Twitter feed, and I'm subscribed to several news agencies throughout the Bay Area and nationally, and I'm able to check very quickly just the headlines of what's going on and figure out, you know, some coverage options for the day within a very brief period of time, which you need to do with all these sources constantly coming at you. So that's why checking it on your mobile device, social media feeds, Facebook even, I've gotten story ideas from articles.
It's interesting because one of the things that leads to is this whole 24/7 news cycle, which is that there's constant pressure to produce information, to provide information. Do you feel that in your day-to-day jobs?
Yes.
Oh yes, especially being online only. And people demand it from us. They will be, because we editors at Patch list our phone numbers, our email on the sites, people will call us in the middle of the night and say, there's a loud noise at my neighbor's house. What is it? Or they'll leave a comment on our Facebook page because they feel more comfortable communicating with us through that medium. It is very different. It's not for everyone, but being in the internet journalism business, that's just the requirement of what we do, and we accept it.
So one of the things that must be tough in print is you're done. I mean, you produce the newspaper, there's a deadline, you're done, and you can't go back and unring that bell, can you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge for sure. I mean, but that's just the nature of the beast, and that's been like that for a while. I mean, we have other avenues, and that's sort of, you know, the beauty of the technology is that we can post it on breaking news online. And then, you know, we put it elsewhere as, you know, Twitter, Facebook, all those things. And, but, you know, I mean, we don't put the story out until it's ready to go. It's not like there's this pressure that, you know, we have a piece of information and just post it. I mean, we still have our responsibility to make, you know, fact check and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, there's a balance to that. You know, I do like to go to bed. And so, you know, there's a time and place for a lot of things. But yeah, it's just a matter of just balancing all of that.
And I think posting online is really how we try to keep up with everybody else, and the more frequently during the day, the more we keep people informed. Some of our sister papers, like the Mercury News, will in fact still do post stories before they even go to print. The main company that owns us, I won't bore you with all the different divisions, but it's called Digital First Media. And that is the philosophy, digital first. And so sometimes we'll wait to pick up a story from the Mercury News, but it's already posted online, even though it's not on print. So I think you're seeing even newspapers relying more and more on websites and you know, just tweeting, and that's how we stay current.
But in the electronic media in particular, I would think there's immense pressure still to get it first. I mean, you still see ads promoting local TV stations, national networks. Who got this information out to the public first? I guess CNN won't be doing that anytime soon, since the information they got out first during the Boston bombing proved to be incorrect. But is there, I mean, what is it like for you, Kiet? Are you're covering a story? Are you expected to tweet on it, at least as a means of drawing an audience to the show before the show comes on?
I think the Boston bombing served as a major reality check that it is ultimately important to get it right, not to be first, because people at home don't watch TV news the way that we do in our newsroom, and that's with 5 different TVs going on at the same time. And that when you're first, really, the only value in that is bragging rights. And I don't think it serves the public if you're first by 60 or 90 seconds. I think the Boston bombing really is going to make a lot of news managers think twice about that pressure to be first. So, so that said, yes, there is immense pressure to be first, but I think when you are first and you get it wrong, there is a lot of hell to pay.
Have there been instances where you've done something and you, oh my God, I better take that down right away, or I wish I hadn't done that? I mean, one of the things about print is its permanency. You can only correct it the next day, usually in a small box on page 2. But what about this electronic stuff? I mean, has there been a time when you thought, oh boy, I really had to learn a lesson from that one? Stacie?
How we do it is we really utilize our relationships with our social media platforms. So we'll put tips out, or we'll put kind of teasers out on Twitter and Facebook. Hey, we've heard this, there might be this, we're checking it out. And we're very transparent about our process in the reporting, our process on who we've talked to. If we're in our car, I know we're not supposed to be tweeting, but we're tweeting in our car, racing over to the scene now, we'll provide more details soon. We like to view our site as the ultimate platform where we're not going to be deleting things willy-nilly just because it's not in a paper. We still have a very, we have integrity of what we put up on the website. So we use these social media platforms as a way to draw in readers and then try to follow up with them to the site.
Anna?
Well, we're a breaking news station. That's what we're built on. That's what we do. And that's what I was told when I was hired, you know? So when we hear that there's breaking news, we definitely want to get there. And it's not about getting there first. It's just about getting there as fast as you can to get the right information from the scene. So that happens constantly. I mean, you know, it's almost every day where somebody's trying to get somewhere quickly to get the information. But we always, you know, we just tell the listeners what we know at the time. You know, we've heard that there is something going on Market Street. We have a reporter on the way. We'll get to the reporter as soon as we can. And it's just all about getting there, finding a parking space in an impossible area, and racing to the scene and just talking to people about what's going on. I mean, it's really pretty simple. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's a really pretty simple formula. You know, you hear something's going on, you get there, and you get the information right. And that's like Kiet was saying, you know, you have to get it right.
But there must have been times when somebody's had to backtrack from something that they've already put out. Everybody here is...
I can't think of it. I mean, obviously the Boston Marathon bombing arrest, because the Associated Press came out with it, you know, we assumed that it was valid. And that's, you know, basically just out of a track record with our relationship with the Associated Press, you know, over years and years. And I'll use the instance of when Gabrielle Giffords was shot. You know, the Associated Press was one of the few news organizations that didn't announce that she was killed, but in fact that she was injured, and they didn't have anything for a couple hours, and it was frustrating for me at the time, but I appreciated the fact that they were sort of, you know, taking their time to make sure that the reports were valid. So as a partner with the Associated Press, you know, there's a trust relationship, and obviously that was a screw up with the Boston Marathon bombing arrest, and you know, I echo, you know, the fact that I think that was a big wake-up call.
We're going to come back to that.
Everyone.
I'm consistently going to interrupt John. We're going to take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Special Edition. We're joined by a panel of news experts from the Peninsula and throughout the Bay Area. We're happy to be joined by John Mays, the editor-in-chief of the San Mateo Daily Journal. Mario Dianda, the editor of the Daily News. He's not an editor-in-chief, but I guess we'll have to get by. Stacie Chan, the editor of Patch.com here on the Peninsula and throughout many communities. Kiet Do, who's a South Bay reporter for CBS 5, and Anna Duckworth, KCBS reporter. Thank you all for joining us. We're talking off the air about Twitter and information, and we're spinning off of the mistake that was made by CNN, and you're busy monitoring all this stuff. How hard is it? How much do you have to learn to read what's there to say, I don't know if this is true, or this is true and we're going to go with it? What's the tension that's there, Anna?
Well, I mean, the tension is you can't just go off of rumors and gossip that you read on the social media. Anybody knows that. You have to be pretty savvy about being able to distinguish a fact from fiction, and to get it, you have to call the person who can tell you the truth, and you actually have to have that human interaction. You can't get it from a device, in my opinion. You have to talk to people email's acceptable kind of nowadays for statements and whatnot. But I'm a real big believer in actually either meeting someone in person and getting it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, or verifying information on the phone. We wouldn't go on the air at KCBS, I don't believe it, unless we had it verified by the newsmaker themselves.
Stacie, we were talking about this off the air. Go ahead and make the point you were making about all this interaction with the media and social media and people.
Right, so off there we were just saying as journalists, we feel that we do have that barometer to see if one news organization is a little bit more trustworthy than just, say, an average blog. My concern, probably not with the Bay Area, since I'd like to think we have a much more intelligent audience, but there are a lot of people who are using social media as their news sources, and they'll read something from their friend's newsfeed, they're quick to press that share button, and they're sharing wrong information. And the timing or the ability for word of mouth to go viral now is so quick with wrong information. And that's a little concerning to me, that the public may not know how to distinguish what is a credible news source from what is not.
As Abraham Lincoln said, you can't believe everything you read on the internet.
Right. I mean, but that's sort of the role of news organizations themselves, is to sort of, sift through all that information, determine what's real, and then put out what is actually the news. And so, that's sort of one of the reasons for the success of news organizations, whether it be internet or radio or TV or newspapers, is that, we actually go through the process of verifying that information.
I think you would be remiss to ignore everything that happens on social media. Case in point, if you're at the scene of breaking news and you are hearing from a wide range of neighbors over and over again that you're hearing one particular fact and they're all repeating it, then I think there's some validity to that. Of course, you have to source it and say, you report that broadly and say that this is what we're hearing. We haven't yet confirmed it with the officials, but there might be some credibility to this. Now, you take that and you apply that analogy to social media, and you say, the Twitter sphere is blowing up. Everybody's talking about this particular thing. I think if you don't mention that, then I think you're missing something in the reporting.
I think you mention it, but also you treat social media as you would a source.
Precisely.
And that's really not different than 20, 30 years ago when you treated other sources. You have to vet the information. As Anna points out, you still have to make phone calls and deal directly with sources to verify. I think that's why, as newspapers and radio and TV stations, we still have a certain credibility, probably lower than other occupations, but we still have that. And I think most people recognize that, and so they are, as they wade through the social media, still going to some traditional news sources to see how it pans out against the overall, whatever is trending at the time.
I want to go back to something you just said, though, Kiet, about, you're in an environment where lots of people are telling you something, you decide to put it on the air with the caveat, I'm only hearing this, but it turns out to be incorrect. What's your responsibility there? I mean, we saw that to some degree in some of these stories where network television is relying on the very kinds of resources you're talking about and putting things out there that ultimately prove not to have been the case. So where do you draw that line? I mean, that's the kind of pressure you're under, but where do you draw that line?
I think this should be a cautionary tale to all elected officials and people who are supervisor positions at breaking news scenes. That if you do not feed the journalists the information, there is a void to fill. There is a column to write, a story to write, a report to file on the air. And so we're going to have to go with the information that we have at the time. There's only so much that you can say in terms of what you see and what you hear. At some point, you're going to have to sort of report broadly on what you see. And so if these newsmakers aren't talking, then the information is going to come from somewhere, and that, I think, is the message. That's the take-home, that they have to be more open and share this information. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of rumor and speculation.
You're relying on a whole array of sources of information that are come flying at you, right? I mean, I think about one of the things that was notable to me about the Boston bombing is that the footage we all saw wasn't from a network camera. It was from somebody standing around with a camera of their own. And it wasn't too long after that, the Chicago Sun-Times laid off its entire photography staff. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence, but I don't think they're cause and effect so much as there's more and more there are more and more sources of information to rely on, so you don't necessarily have to be everywhere because somebody's there more than likely with a camera or a recording device. So how does that factor in? I mean, so a lot of your job sounds almost like you're a traffic cop, that you're directing, you're having to sort through all this information. Is that really what it's about now?
I mean, in a sense, I mean, but also we put it into context, and I think that's a large part of it as well, is that, I mean, certainly the U.S. Supreme Court decision to overturn Proposition 8 was big news, and everyone was sort of watching social media, watching television news, listening to the radio to find out that immediate information. But I think a lot of people also look to newspapers the next day to sort of see what is the context, what's the breadth of the reaction. I think you would be remiss not to check out what the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post did with that story, along with our organizations as well, to find out the local reaction and sort of the context of it. And I think that's sort of what people look for, is that they look for what is news, and then what does it mean to them?
Well, let me ask the question that way. That's a good point, John, which is, you'd have to have been on a desert island somewhere not to hear about the Supreme Court decision, because there's so many different ways the information comes out. I used to like to say, try not to find out who won the Super Bowl the day of the game, because it's unavoidable now unless you decide to go on a media fast. So what's your role? Because in some ways you'll be breaking the news, but often you're having to wait because you don't come out at the same time cycle as that, or somebody else higher up is bigfooting you, and the networks are reporting it. So what's your role in a national story like the announcements about same-sex marriage?
Well, I think it's simple. It's the reaction and the context, like I said. But that's just one type of story that we cover. I mean, that's a national story. Obviously, it's big news, and everyone wants to know that context and reaction. But that doesn't take away from our day-to-day responsibility of covering the news that's on the peninsula. So that's a whole other realm of stories. I mean, that's our bread and butter. That's our focus. So, yes, we do contextualize national stories, state stories. We talk about the budget and the state budget and its impact on local communities. But we are also uncovering news in our communities by covering, city council, planning commission, school boards, covering breaking news here as well. So it's just one piece of the larger puzzle that makes up our news organization.
Okay, and that's pretty much the same charter for the Daily News,
correct,
I would think. What's your sort of day-to-day charter when it comes to covering the Bay Area? Is it contextualized national stories? Is it basically cover whatever comes up?
Very simple.
I think if
It's
you
local, and then you branch out with regional and state after that.
But both of you work for, all three of you really work for regional organizations. So how do you balance that? What come into work every day? What do you do?
I think if you contextualize the national news, I think that's low-hanging fruit. I think it's easy to do. I think you can always get the man on the street interview and do that. So I think in a bind, if there's nothing else to do, then you do that story. But I think the focus is to stay local or stay regional. And for us, the litmus test is whatever I cover in San Jose, will the guy in Marin or Napa care, and vice versa. And so you have to broaden it out so that it has wide appeal to everybody. So
and that must be hard, because some stories may be an important story to San Jose, but you can't make it a story that may be meaningful to somebody in Fairfield or San Rafael.
I think if you focus on what I call kind of universal themes, overarching themes of humanity, where you have struggle between good or bad, corrupt government, or good Samaritans or heroes. If you focus on these major themes, then I think that has wide appeal.
Anna?
Well, I feel we're very lucky to live in this region because there's no shortage of stories. So we're definitely a local news station. We focus on local and, like I told you, breaking news. But we're always looking for issues that impact people's lives. It's pretty simple, the same thing that we're all looking at here. And we're consumers of the news just as much as the people who are looking to us. It's our responsibility to figure it out first, bring it to them, let them know why they should care. That's one of our promos, I think, why they care about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, Kiet had an interesting point talking about the low-hanging fruit of contextualizing a larger issue, national, and I think that's true. But there is another facet to that, and I think that is when you're talking about other stories that have a direct impact in a unique way in this area, that's our responsibility to sort of reveal what that is. And I'll give the example of the state budget, talking about the local control funding formula for education. If you look at it from a statewide, if we were to simply rely on the Associated Press story about the impact on the state, it wouldn't do justice to our local community, which has a unique set of school districts that rely on a generally different type of funding formula. So translating that information from Sacramento and how it impacts directly this community is one of our core responsibilities as a news organization. So I think there's a little bit of both there, talking about reaction to a larger picture story, man on the street kind of thing, and then also sort of, finding out what does this mean, how does this affect our readers here, I think is a different animal in a way.
Yeah, the networks always make me laugh when they do their man on the street interview, and invariably those people seem to be on the streets of New York City. It's like they really haven't gone very far afield. Stacie, you were going to say something about this.
Yeah, so at Patch, we do very different types of stories. We don't have the legalese to be analyzing the Supreme Court's decision. The story that we did in San Mateo County is when can same-sex couples get married in San Mateo County? Going to the county clerk's office, seeing if they're able to issue marriage licenses. We want to get as granular as possible because that is what we try to own. We try to own local down to the city. And at the same time, the Los Altos Patch editor said, well, I can't cover this. I've got a huge school board meeting about the Bullis Charter School coming to town. So I'm just not going to focus on this. So it's just about knowing what your community is talking about. And for most of the communities, it was talking about Prop 8, but for Los Altos, it was all about this charter school.
And one of the roles that Patch played in that context was letting everybody know there was going to be a rally in Mountain View if they wanted to go. So there's another function you're performing there that may not be available to other people. We're going to take another break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Special Edition. We're talking about the news, the state of the news media with a panel of experts. We were talking a little bit about where you go to gather information, how you have to sift through the volume of information that comes at you at a pace that's a lot different than it might have been even 10 years ago. But it raises the question about whether or not, as a member of the public, are we being informed? What are you not getting to that you wish you could? Are you so busy covering and managing this flow of information that really there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get covered? I can go to any community and they'll complain that there's stories there that don't get paid attention to. I think that's always been the case. But let me ask the question generally. Are we being informed, or are we getting less information? We're getting more information but less valuable information than we were 5 or 10 years ago. Nobody wants to jump on that one in a hurry.
I believe all the information you can get is valuable, even if it's wrong, because if you learn how to discern, which we all have, and I think consumers are learning to do much faster also, you learn what to throw out, you learn what to keep, and that's valuable because you have more sources to get into your pile of information. But you do have to become more responsible, us as journalists and consumers, as the people who receive the news, for what to throw out, what's junk and what's not. But I think everybody's getting better at that with what's coming at us.
But we learn as much about, I don't know, some celebrity's newest tattoo as we do about global warming and the president's. It all comes at us at the same pace. Should we be relying on you to help us sort this through, or is that some of it the responsibility of the people who are doing the consuming?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
The internet's been around about 20 years. Smartphones have been around about 5 years. So I think in that time, viewers and readers have gotten more sophisticated over that time, and they've learned how to filter on their own. The problem is there's so much volume of information out there that I think bringing it back to the point of this whole panel is that just because there's more information out there, it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily mean that people are more informed. So I think when you have somebody whose job it is for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, is to sift through all that information and using their best judgment, and you trust their judgment to say that this is the information that I think you have, I think that has tremendous value. And I think over time, as people use these devices more and more and become more sophisticated, I think they value that more over time.
Stacie, what do you want to say?
So because there's a plethora of information, I believe, consumers now can be choosier. So it's now up to us to brand our organizations as the type of information that people want. If you're in a car, you're obviously going to be listening to the radio and getting breaking news alerts. You're not going to be checking your mobile app. But if you want to learn about your...
supposed to be, yeah.
Well, I probably do too. But if you want to learn about your kid's Little League game, you're going to be going to Patch. You're not going to be turning on the TV or looking through even the San Francisco Chronicle. People are getting smart about what exactly their news outlets are giving them. So yes, there's a lot more information, but people are getting smart about where to go.
I have to tell you, sometimes it feels like we're more informed, but not better informed, Mario. It seems like, I worry about people who rely on, nobody can look at every website on the internet. Nobody can live long enough. So everybody looks at 5 or 6 sources of information for them. And I worry that often those sources of information are ones that feed their own point of view. I mean, one of the things about a good news story is that it might tell somebody something they didn't want to hear, that may confound their own view of the world, Anna. And so I worry that we're more informed but not better informed. Is that concerning?
I think we have to pick our battles. And for us, I'm generally aware what celebrities are doing, but we don't put a lot of that information in our paper because we figure that a lot of our readers know where to go if that's the kind of information they want. But if they want to know that in Palo Alto, there's an ordinance that's going to prohibit people from living in their cars next to the Cubberley Community Center, they're probably going to find it in our paper, not on national media, and that's why they go to our newspaper for that kind of information. It's a challenge for us because our staff is very small, and we cover 10 cities. So every day it's a decision of what we do cover. Some of you alluded to that. And you just have to sort of pick your battle, have a general instinct of what people are looking for, and try to provide the kind of information that they're likely not to get from other sources or as much from other sources. And I think that is how you develop your niche.
Anna, your thoughts on this?
Well, I was just thinking, I was speaking with Kiet earlier, I just read an article yesterday about BBC's Global News Network and how their viewership is up 7%. They now have 256 million viewers. And they attribute a lot of it to the Arab Spring. But their director said that he believes that it is because the audience is looking for that impartial, trustworthy news, and they've figured out where to go to get it, especially during such a critical part in history, a critical time in history. So I think the numbers are starting to show. I think that seeing about the sweeps for Channel 5, seeing our audience numbers still rising here in the Bay Area, are showing that people know where to go to get the accurate information, or they're figuring it out as all this new technology is coming at them.
So they're starting to sort through what's opinion and what's fact and what's information versus what's not really, what's like faux information, John?
Sure. I mean, I don't think misinformed people are a new phenomena. I think that's always sort of.
There just seem to be more of them in Congress.
They just, yeah. They just have more places to state their opinion. That's all. And so, I mean, we hear it too. I read this on the internet somewhere. Why don't you look into this? We look into it. It's nothing, right? So, I mean, you just take it with a grain of salt. And I think, Anna has a great point that you have to build trust with your viewership, readership, listenership. And if you do that, if you're trustworthy, people will naturally go to your organization.
Yeah. I've lost track of the number of times, I'm a recovering journalist. I worked for newspapers for 31 years. I lost track of the number of times there'd be a staff meeting and the editor or the publisher would come in and tell us that we simply had to do more with less. And it sounds to me like that's also the problem, is that you're getting more information coming at you, more to sort through. And there aren't necessarily the resources there were to do all this 10 years ago. I mean, some of the local daily newspapers you work for, similar newspapers a generation ago had a staff that might have been 2 or 3 times the size. I don't know if there have been cutbacks at other places, but how do you manage that? How do you do, are you expected to do more with less?
When you say more with less, I assume you mean budget and people. But Mario made a really good point earlier that we've got technology. Technology is one of the best resources that we have. Yes, it doesn't replace another staff writer or a staff member, but you're going to be getting some amazing tips that no person could get just by walking around the street, because we have direct access to people talking about Prop A, and we can geolocate where exactly they are, so we know that they're a Belmont resident, for example. So for Belmont Patch, we're talking about all the reactions that Belmont residents are having. So it's about getting smarter in how you report, and I don't see it as less in terms of feeling supported. It's just we have to realize all the tools that are out there.
I mean, I think with talking about online resources, I mean, at one point reporters would had to go down to City Hall and get the staff reports for the City Council agenda. Then they had to drive to the police station and write down the police blotter information. All of that now we can access online. It saves time. So you figure you could do more actually with the time that's saved through technology than technology is taking away from us. And what person wouldn't want more information? So you say, is there too much information? I don't know. I mean, I think as much information as you can throw at me, I want, and then I can sort it through it. You learn how to sort through it a little bit quicker over time. So I think there's definitely benefits to having this technology, and I think we're sort of harnessing that energy in a positive way, and it's working for us.
Anna.
It just makes me laugh because I can't tell you how many times I've clicked on like a link to an article on Facebook and like read the first 3 lines and just skip that's not, but it looks interesting, the headline looks interesting, and then you realize pretty quickly whether or not it's legit or
How can you tell?
I don't really know. I think you just get like almost a 7th sense about it or 6th sense about it. But when it starts getting too editorial, I tend to tune out. Opinions are good, but when they start going way too far the other way, I tend to like.
It's a little bit like
back
spam.
off.
You kind of know
You
when
kind
you
of
see
just
it.
know it's spam.
We're running out of time, so this is a tough question to answer shortly. But because there are so many ways people can go get information, how much pressure are you under to make it more almost personal? That this is what you can expect from this news organization. This is the kind of story Kiet will do, or this is the kind of story you'll see by some of your reporters. Is there a temptation? Is there a pressure to make it stand out by itself, not just because of the content, but the way it's delivered?
I think so. I think each organization has its own brand, and I think each reporter has their own personal brand too. And so ultimately you want to be memorable, but you also want to be true to yourself, so that if you're telling a story in a way that's not sustainable, where you're getting way out of your skin to do a story in a particular way, then I don't think that's going to last over time. But I think in terms of not being the same as everybody else and distinguishing yourself, I think that's just as important in the overall scheme of things.
Stacie.
I would say that Patch sometimes has the opposite problem in that we're too personal, in that a lot of our editors live in the cities that they're covering. So they have the option to vote for who they want to win the mayoral election. But at the same time, I think people like that about the news, in that they now have these personalities. They want to see what Kiet's reporting on. They want to hear Anna on the radio. They want to see their local Patch editor at the city council meeting, because they trust them as a reliable source, but know that their perspective on the news is not only accurate, but just interesting, and they have a good take on it.
Yeah. Anna?
Well, the thing that comes to mind for me is I've always been a big fan of KCBS. I've listened since college days, probably earlier than that with my parents in the car. So when I got the job there, I kind of freaked out. And I thought, there's no way, they made a mistake, I can't do this. And I started listening really carefully. I've always listened carefully. And what I realized is that everybody has a unique voice. Every one of the reporters sounds different, but they all bring the value in their own way. I think the standard that's been established there helps raise the bar. But so I'm not so big on the personality. I'm a big on the information and realizing that it's good to have as many voices as you can.
Yeah. Mara, your thoughts on this?
I feel pretty much like the others, and I believe that when people continue to call the newsroom with information and tips, they know that they're going to get some kind of response, and they're usually just calling you and not someone else. And to me, and that may sound old-fashioned, but when you are getting news tips from the community and they have a certain trust that certain stories can come out by contacting you, I think then we're still relevant.
John, I'm going to give you the last word.
Sure.
Or I'll probably cut you off.
Yeah, I mean, I like San Mateo County, and I like the people here. I want the community to be a better place. And I want my work to reflect that. I think that's sort of our mission overall. You know, if that's our personality, so be it. But I think that just having that sort of frame of mind sort of imbues itself in our coverage. You know, we want this community to be better, and so our coverage reflects that.
Yeah. And people appreciate that? You think that's why people are drawn to your organizations? The things we're talking about that distinguished you, you think that's why people are going to your organizations?
I think people are rediscovering all our brands, that they've left and now they've realized that they can't do it on their own, and now they're coming back.
Yeah. I want to thank the panel for being with us. John Mays, Editor-in-Chief of the San Mateo Daily Journal. Mario Dianda, editor of the Palo Alto Daily News. Stacie Chan of Patch.com. I'd call you an editor, but I can't keep track of all the different publications you're in charge of. Kiet Doe, South Bay reporter for CBS 5, and Anna Duckworth, reporter for KCBS Radio. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you for being here. This has been Peninsula TV Special Edition. I'm Mark Simon. Thanks for joining us.